Hi, my name is Jennifer Dotson, and I'm the founder and program coordinator for Highland Park Poetry. And I'm really thrilled to be hosting today's episode of Poetry Today. I have a special guest with me, Joseph Kuhn-Carey. Joseph recently published Postcards from Poland, a collection of poetry that won the third Journal of Modern Poetry Book Award and was published this spring by Chicago Poetry Press. And wow, you have a really creative and you're very diverse background and quite accomplished. Let's see, I know you studied writing at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop,
Yes.
and you have written for Downbeat, Jazz Times, and the Boston Globe. And you've also released 2 CDs of children's songs. Okay, which also got you connected to the Grammys somehow.
Yes, my brother and I, because of the number of songs we had on the internet on these CDs, they allowed us to come in the back door and join the Grammy, the Recording Academy. So we were able to vote on. Now I vote in the Grammys.
Wow, very exciting. And you've been, but how long have you been writing poetry?
Well, I've written it on and off since graduate school, and kind of slide between poetry and fiction. But since my 2 sons came along 14 and 11 years ago, I started writing songs, stories, and poems for them. And so the poetry kind of came in more and more because I didn't have much time to write, and taking care of them and also working. So the shorter amount of time I needed for a poem was great. So that's sort of how I kind of focused on poetry, especially in the last couple of years.
Wow. And then I know you and I became acquainted because Highland Park Poetry has their annual Poetry That Moves contest, which is a collaboration with Pace Suburban North Shore buses, putting poetry on inside the buses, 1 poem each month. And your poem,
Sizzling Fiddler's Sling.
Okay, it's not easy to say. Okay. Sizzling Fiddler's Sling, I think, was the April 2013
Great memory, yeah.
poem. And it was a beautiful, colorful poster. I'm sorry we didn't bring it today, but well, actually, why don't you read that poem, because that's a great introduction.
Should I read that one? Great.
Yeah.
It's from the book, and obviously it was fun to have it on a bus going up and down the lines up to Highland Park from Evanston and also in Waukegan. But this is a poem about all the music that happens in Zakopane, which is a little town at the base of the Tatra Mountains in the southern Poland. And as you go through the restaurants at night, there's just fiddlers and bass players and songs coming out of each of the restaurants as you walk along, with the fires going inside the restaurants, with where they're cooking the foods, and it's just wonderful. You just can't imagine how beautiful this like gypsy jazz coming out of the mountain folk songs are just emerging from everywhere you walk, and this is about that. Sizzling Fiddler's Sling. Sizzling fiddlers sling out notes in Zakopane from each rustic restaurant along the main street, basses plunking boldly to keep the big beat, while the fleet-fingered accordionists add crisp, crackling logs to the soaring gypsy bonfire, before the musicians break out into sudden song, with stout backs and full hearts, as if pulling a cart loaded with large musical notes from the mountains to each shepherd, each girl in a colorful peasant dress, each wandering tourist sitting over wine and beer and peering for a while into Poland's festive, foot-stomping soul.
Wow. It's very colorful, and it's very attractive. It does make you want to go. And that's sort of the interesting about this book. Talk a little bit about the genesis of this.
Well, actually, it happened all of a sudden. I had piled up, it's an unusual story, but I piled up so many points, my wife and I, on our credit cards. We had 250,000 points there, and I said, well, we should use this to, before it all expires, to take a trip. And so we used it to take her mother, who was born in Poland, back to Poland. So we got 5 free airfares round trip. We flew through Warsaw to Krakow and stayed a week there, and then also a week in Zakopane, which is both those towns in southern Poland. And it was wonderful for her to be back with her family, because she had my mother-in-law had been deported from Poland when she was a little girl, about 5, and during World War II, and sent to Kazakhstan, Russia, where she lost all her family, and except for her father, just they all passed away due to malnutrition and the journey and everything. And she made her way back through Persia, Lebanon, England, back to the United States, or over to the United States.
Okay.
And so this was kind of like bringing her whole family that she had created since that time back to Poland. So it was sort of a meaningful trip back to Poland. And I guess all these poems just kind of emerged after that, just kind of tumbled out because of all the great sights and sounds, and just how meaningful it was to the whole family. So.
Well, it's quite a manuscript. I mean, you do cover everything from lost luggage at the very beginning. I think that's a poem that everybody can identify with. Although, you know, yours had a happy ending, which was nice. But you know, every aspect of the trip you really talked about.
Well, it was sort of designed to sort of be like someone sending each poem is like a postcard being sent back from this trip. So it sort of starts with the first night, and there's the first poem, and there's a last night, and then there's it sort of follows the pace of the trip through the cities. And but it was also trying to play on like what a postcard means to people when they get it, how you're kind of there with the person on the trip. And so each poem is sort of kind of like considered a postcard. That's why we sort of shaped the book, the publisher, and I tried to keep it like a postcard type shape, the whole book. And
well, it definitely looks like the cover does remind you of sort of vintage travel postcards. My grandmother had a collection of all from her travels, all you know, from the 60s and 70s, and it just evoked those old-timey postcards.
Actually, in the back of the book, there is my mother-in-law, Danuta. She ran around her neighborhood and found some old postcards that people had in their collections. So in the back of the book, there's a black and white postcard of Krakow from, could be the last 40 years or something, 40 years ago. So it's kind of neat. It still looks the same. Hasn't right. Town still looks the same.
Wow, that's, you know, considering all the activity that's done historically, that's amazing that could do that. Were there favorite moments for you on the trip? Or favorite poems? I don't know if they're one and the same. They're sort of since they're very experience oriented.
Yeah, experience oriented. I think it was just so great to be with my sons, with my wife, my mother-in-law, and her my wife's brother came too. My brother-in-law. 3 of them spoke Polish, so we were able to blend in with the population. We just rented apartments, just kind of had no schedule, just kind of milled about, sat in the cafes, you know, wandered here and there, took boat rides. But there were just tons of really neat events because we didn't have any plan. So, but there's salt mines, there's castles, there's incredible zoos. You know, it's almost like it's a world no one really knows about over there because it's thousands of years old in many areas of it, and it's got a modern slant too because of new things that are happening over there. But just a vibrant, amazing place to go, and it was just fun to do it with your family too, and share it with your sons.
It's nice to have an inside edge. I mean, the language I'm sure could be a barrier for people like me who don't speak any Polish. So that was helpful for you, and to make it so you're not so alien, I guess, or do you think people recognize you instantly as American?
Well, everyone speaks English too, but and if you know a couple of words, they kind of chuckle along with you and give you a break. But there were a few instances where we ordered food when I was off with my sons by ourselves, and you know, we didn't get the right thing and had to kind of negotiate with hand signals and pointing and things. But when the Polish speakers in our group were there, we were in pretty good shape.
Oh, good.
that worked out well.
Well, I know one of the experiences you had, you got to escape and actually play some golf.
I did.
And you have a lovely poem about that.
I do. I'd love to read that one on the show here. It was. I do like to play golf. I caddied as a kid, so it's always been sort of in my blood when you have the Caddyshack experiences and learning how to play with all the guys you're hanging out there with. But so wherever I go, I always try to just see what's going on in the country. And in Poland, there's only about 20 golf courses, so I hired a cab and just raced out to one day, and I was the only guy in the course besides the golf pro and the guy cutting the grass, the groundskeeper, and maybe one other guy who I talked to in the pro shop afterwards. But so it was sort of like one of these kind of quiet moments when you're the king of the course and there's no one else around. So it was really kind of a moving moment. But I could read that poem if you want.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Got the there. It's called 9 Holes Near Krakow. 9 holes near Krakow, laid out in the countryside like soft pieces of cloth, far away from the hustle and bustle of the Rynek Główny, a quiet gift of barely rustling grass, trees, and sunlight, filled with no one but the sleepy golf pro and the talkative young cab driver who drove you to this nirvana-like place in the little village of Achmenau, 9 holes of the sweetest solitude, as you trudge from shot to shot, up steep hills and down the backsides of others, following the swoops and curves like a map of your life, contemplating each shot like a poem or a lover's sigh, surrounded by gorgeous farmland, red tile roofed houses, and occasional distant puffs of chimney smoke. You swing and feel in harmony with the earth and the birds cawing "Dzień dobry," good morning, overhead. While the groundskeeper mows the fairway grass at a steady, humming pace, you look at the clouds and the horizon and think of your family and wish you could share this magnificent inner moment when time stands still and it's just you and the ball in a manicured Garden of Eden. Thankful for all you have and hoping you can pass on this passion for a sport and the outdoors to your sons so they too can feel the joy of oneness in places like this, where kings once hunted and deer roam free, baffled by the man who smiles and stares at the ever-lightening sky.
Oh,
9
wow.
holes, dear Krakow.
I am not a golfer at all, but after reading that poem, I'd take up
One
golf.
other and go.
Although I should ask, how was your score that day?
I did pretty well. I just rented clubs the guy had in the pro shop and kind of
Okay.
flailed around a few holes, but then ended up, I think, out with a 39 or 40. But sort of, I did okay.
Okay. So I was thinking, well, maybe this, in addition to inspiring great poetry, the experience inspired great golf
It did.
too.
It did. It's all together.
Well, talk about maybe some of the other moments in your trip. I know one of the great inspirations for a poem is fear and anxiety. Did you have any experiences that were maybe a little less euphoric?
Well, there was right outside of Krakow is one of the World War II death camps called Auschwitz, and I had been to Dachau when I was a teenager, just living in Europe for a year, my sophomore year in college, and had traveled there and was just devastated by the experience. So 2 of the members of our group, my mother and brother-in-law, went there, but our children were just a little too young. I knew if they were only 9 and 11, it would just be too much for them. And the guidebook said you should be over 15 years old to go there. So when they came back, though, and I had warned them, I said it's going to be very powerful. They came back and they were just, tears in their eyes. They just, it was very moving for them.
Wow.
And so after that, I wrote a poem about sort of interpreting their experiences. And
Oh, okay.
about that, I can read that
Yes,
poem
that
if
would
you
be
like.
wonderful.
It's called "Thinking of Glasses,"
Oh,
and
okay.
there was a little that was sort of very moving and event for us over there. But thinking of glasses piled high and deep, all sorts of colors and bends, twists and curves, reflecting each other and the viewer, the light bending in a dozen skewered directions. Each pair belonged to someone: a mother, father, sister, brother, uncle, cousin, grandparent, ripped from happy homes and families and sent to Auschwitz, brutal camp of nightmares, crusher of life and dreams, soul smasher of the stars, snuffing out sparks before they had a chance to change the world in even the smallest way. Piles of glasses, inert, lifeless, cracked, spent, defeated, astonishingly gripping, full of fear and cries for help. And nearby, a huge pile of shoes, another of suitcases, still another of artificial limbs and a small mountain of hair. Horrible evidence of lives snatched away for reasons still difficult to understand by people trying to play God and change the course of life, who were finally washed away and exposed as demons of intergalactic proportions, no more important than the precious tiny glasses that once fit a young girl's head and let her see a once innocent world clearly as she ran to play with her friends after school on a sunlit Polish afternoon. I guess in a way that's sort of a little tribute to my mother-in-law, who
Right.
was kind of taken away from her life too by being deported. But besides that moving moment, there were a lot of other joyful times. that was a pretty strong moment. But there were some just interesting experiences. Like I think, as you know, I read a poem once called about a McDonald's. There's a McDonald's that my
Right.
kids like to go to in Krakow, and of course, young boys, any kids like to go to McDonald's. Well, this one was set in this amazing restaurant that you could go downstairs to, and you're in this 1,000-year-old catacomb like curved room and
Oh
brick
my gosh.
ceilings and everything. It was really kind of a neat experience. And so I wrote a poem about that.
Well,
that too, but
I think we have to share that with the viewers.
It's
Poem about
a
McDonald's.
little more upbeat
Yes,
than this
yes.
one, but it's called Magical Medieval McDonald's. In the magical medieval McDonald's, with all the foods listed in Polish, but all the uniforms and crowds and excited children the same as anywhere around the world, you take your tray and head downstairs, and suddenly you're no longer in modern-day Krakow. You're descending instead back through time 1,000 years, as the walls turn to brick and the vaulted curved ceilings surround you until you reach the first of many interconnected ancient rooms with red brick walls, gorgeous old ceilings, and tiny dungeon-like windows, high up and inaccessible, letting in feeble bits of light. You wander from room to room, astonished at where you are, disoriented because you're eating today's hamburger in a 1,000-year-old room where knights may once have met, and casks of wine or possibly trunks laden with gold or fine silk cloth may once have been stashed for safekeeping. The stone floor adds that final special touch, and you nosh contentedly with your family, knowing that you'll most likely never see a McDonald's like this anywhere around the fast spinning world again.
Wow.
Well, we went there several times. So.
Yes. Well, I understand. My daughter is on an international exchange program this year in Germany, and she just sent us photos. She and a friend traveled to Frankfurt, which is not, it was a bit of a drive from where she's living temporarily, just because they have the only Chipotle in Germany. And she sent us photos. Now, they didn't have
a little taste of your favorite food.
No, they didn't have the magical catacombs under the Chipotle. That sounds quite, I mean, that would give your Big Mac a whole new experience.
Filled experience. Yeah, definitely. It was.
Wow.
We had several Big Macs there.
Okay. Well, that's also got to be reassuring, especially for kids when they're traveling. And
It is. They felt real familiar with that.
Right.
And, but actually, there too, like everyone in the United States, too, or anywhere around the world, they somehow got the kid. It's always a teenager behind the counter, and they somehow got the order a little wrong. It's always like a little struggle with, even it's the same in every country.
Okay.
You're packed with people and trying to get your hamburger the right way.
Well, you've already shown such a range of some of the poems that are contained in the book. It really is like a travelogue, and does inspire one to want to visit, because it does sound both the highs and the lows. But talk to me a little bit about the process of making this book.
Oh, sure. To make it, well, the poems kept tumbling out after I got back from the trip. I might have started a few during the trip, and writing on scraps of paper as I always do. I'm always just picking up an envelope, writing on something when I have a minute. But I just had all of a sudden I just had so many of them. I started reading them to my kids and to my wife, and then to my mother-in-law. Mm-hmm. And then they were like, "Well, these are pretty good. You better put these together." And as I kind of compiled them, and I said, "Wow, I've got so many of them." I just put them in a manuscript. I think then through Highland Park Poetry, mm-hmm. and hearing from you about these other manuscript contests, I sent it in to the Chicago Poetry Press Book Award contest, and lo and behold, it was selected.
Wow.
But I wouldn't have known about it unless you had mentioned it, which is great and wonderful. So, and it was just very surprising. I didn't think a book about travel poems.
Right, I know, because it's so personal. It was a personal experience. But really, there's a universality about it as well that really gives you pause, because I think everybody can enjoy, like I said, being an American abroad. You hunger for the thing like the McDonald's, plus the loss of the luggage, but then also the more profound moments that are unique to the place that you were visiting, your in-laws' experiencing of the death camp memorial, and
it's true.
Then also the joyous and vibrant musical experience in Zakopane. That definitely captures a whole lot. But I think a lot of people can enjoy and.
I think so. It's anyone who's traveled knows the ups and downs of travel. There's going to be stuff that goes wrong, and you got to roll with the punches, and just that's part of the journey. That's what makes it special. Is that if you're with family or friends, or it's how life hits you and affects you and twists and bends while you're seeing You're going outside your safety zone. You're in a different country, in a different place, a different city, and
Well, and that's the poet's responsibility to observe.
it is. It is.
And anyway, Highland Park Poetry is thrilled to have Joe reading for us on Friday, May 16th at the Art Center of Highland Park, 1957 Sheridan Road. Again, that's going to be at 8 o'clock, and he'll be reading more poems from Postcards from Poland. And there'll be a book signing, refreshments, and an open mic afterwards. So if there are poets who want to attend, they're welcome to bring up to 6 poems to share, and it'll just be a fun, rollicking evening.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be good. But let's talk about your writing in general. So you said that you did do a lot of rhyming poems, especially when you were writing for your sons when they were small. But what are in terms of your own personal writing style, who influenced you?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think a lot of the teachers and people I got to know over the years, I was interviewing a lot of people for jazz and music artists, and Ken Nordine, who is a Chicago-based guy who's now in his 90s, was just one of my a wonderful influence. He originated Word Jazz, which is like he's on WBEZ and has a late night program where he's always creating these incredible worlds with just stream of consciousness stories. And I actually interviewed him once about 30 years ago in Boston when I was living out there, and we kept in touch ever since. And he's just been a marvelous guy. He and his wife Beryl have just always encouraged me, and kind of but he's one of the main influences, I think, on my style. I kind of discovered his records from the 50s and that I found in the library, and all the things that he's done since have really, and just his friendship has really been wonderful too. Another guy is Steve Katz. There was a writer I took a course with when I was in college, and he had a lot of books out in the 60s and 70s, and he was a fiction writer, but did some poetry too, and just anything could be possible. He just was showing you all the different modern styles of writing. Janet Burway is another friend of mine, and she's always been real encouraging since I had a course with her at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop. She's another one I correspond with a lot over the years, and she's terrific too. She's always been very supportive, and her style of writing sort of kind of infiltrated a little bit into mine. Trying to think, there was a poet at Notre Dame called Ernest Sandine. He was just a wonderful old guy with a satchel and a pipe, and he just kind of introduced you to poetry back then. So I think he's sort of an influence too. But then of course poets like Jennifer Dotson and Donna Pecori, who are all published by Chicago Poetry Press. But those are people that are sort of I absorb any influence that's around me. Like I just saw Sonia Sanchez reading her poems at Chicago Poetry Fest, and boy, she has an incredible style that. It's just wonderful to encounter. Gwendolyn Brooks was great. I used to enjoy her stuff and see her years ago. But I guess it's everybody and everything. I kind of
the kitchen
absorb
and
it
the
all.
kitchen
You
sink.
get to the smorgasbord approach.
I was going to also ask you, this was a very sort of focused project related to the trip, which is nice because it gives it a real framework, a lot of debut manuscripts, you're pulling together basically, this is every poem I've ever written and published, and then I want to put into a collection, but yet there's no real framework. And this has, with the postcard theme and the from the beginning of the trip to the end of the trip, that whole arc really gives it a nice narrative flow, whereas and it also gives pressure for you for your next project. Are you working on anything new right now?
Well, I do have I took a trip with my family to Germany 2 years ago, and I have like a trunk load of poems from that trip, and and some from Alaska that I've been kind of working on. So I don't know if I'm going to become a country by country poet.
Right. Travel poet. Okay.
You ever see the kids author that he did all those books on Venice, and it was just wonderful stuff. It just made me think that would be wonderful to be that he would have him on New York. This is New York.
Okay.
This is, I forget his name, but he had wonderful children's books that were illustrated, and there's just about 10 of them. But it would be wonderful to fall into his category too, of just being able to write poems about wherever you've been as you travel, or other things too, I guess too. So I'm not limiting myself, but it's fun.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good. Certainly the more you travel, the more experiences, the more chances to observe and to become inspired. Do you have any more poems that you could share with us?
Oh, sure. I've got, would you like another, to hear another one?
Yeah, that would be great.
This is a kind of a fun one from an experience in Zakopane about going down a gravity go-kart type thing down the hill that we sort of just explored. But it's called Shooting the Tracks. Rolling up the funicular rail line to Gubawufka Hill, a quick bop to the top to soak in the sweet panoramic views of green Tatra Mountains and zesty Zakopane down below. Suddenly you spot a shining steel runway filled with steep curves, working its way down a bit of the mountain, and little go-kart-like cars speeding through the convoluted paces. Drawn like metal to a strong magnet, you take the plunge and ride with your young sons as if on bareback horses, yelping to high heaven like the world was on fire and you're carrying the last piece of good wood. At the bottom, a big hook catches onto your go-kart and pulls you up the steep slope to the starting line. You pay your fee, shake and bake your fast-pumping heart, and do it all over again with a pure, childlike shout that a tall, bearded Slovakian hiker with superior ears, just pulling himself up to the highest nearby mountaintop, might faintly hear and ponder aloud at God's wondrous, silly plans.
That's great.
My heart was pumping on that ride.
Right. So how long was the actual ride? It probably felt endless, but
it was. You had a stick that you could control your speed, but there was not a lot of protection. But it was probably about a 2-minute ride down, and we did that a couple of times. And it was either that or zip lining through the trees. And I figured that was less dangerous than the other one.
Wow, that's definitely very scary. I did also read your The Boys in the Plastic Bubble. What was that?
That was cool. It was I don't know if I have that poem. Oh, actually, I could read it out of the book. But it was there was this park, Jordana Park, where you could go, and I've never seen it before, but they had these big bubbles, like clear plastic bubbles you could step into, and they would zip you in, pump oxygen into, inflate it, and then they'd push you out into this little, 1-foot deep lake or pond, and on a pond. It was like a big pond, and the guy had a rope attached to it. But so then the kids could try to run in it, and I actually tried it too. It was like it was really hard to run in it. It was like you'd fall down, you were exhausted after about 5 minutes. But it was just so unusual. You're like you're trapped in like a soap bubble, like or a bath bubble, it was just I've never seen anything like it. And then sort of a timer would go off, and then they'd pull you back in, and then you had to pay again but it was pretty unique. I've never seen it before.
I have not heard of that.
So I had a couple of poems. I could try to read one of those if you want to read it out of the. Let's see, where are Boys in Big Plastic Bubbles? I have 2 of them actually. It was so nice and fun. We went back.
It was very inspiring. Extra
time.
Inspiring.
So can you give me the first? Boys in Big Plastic Bubbles. Okay. All right. This is Boys in Big Plastic Bubbles. Boys in big plastic bubbles blown full of air and floating on the Park Jordana pond, sealed into a world of Krakow fun, rolling, running, slipping, sliding, laughing like a lifetime supply of Kraft macaroni and cheese was suddenly theirs at no charge, astonished at the energy needed to push the ball around with all their might, bursting with energy as they toss and tumble until the time clock blings and the man on the dock shouts in Polish, and then slowly reels the little boy fishes in by pulling on the attached ropes, unzips the side bubble zippers, and pulls the pint-sized Jonahs out and onto dry land, panting, eyes bright. All they can say is, "That was so totally cool, and can we please do it again right now?"
That sounds wonderful. Well, again, I hope that our visitors our viewers today will want to come and hear even more poems from Postcards from Poland by Joe on May 16th. That's a Friday evening at the Arts Center of Highland Park at 8 p.m. And also there are more poetry events on our website. Please join us. And thank you so much.
Thank
this
you,
was
Jennifer.
really a delight.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
It was a great,
It's a lot of fun.
great show.